then you're born, and that's the language you hear, the Hebrew language, the language of the Bible. And God talks about how he's going to restore a language, a Lashon HaKodesh in the prophets. What it's talking about is the Hebrew language. It's the language God used to speak creation into existence, right? And this is the language that a whole nation of Israel, their children, from the time even before they're born, this is the language that they speak, or they listen to being spoken. So it's just ingrained in them. And then, when they're 5 years old, and it's time to send little Joseph or little Benjamin to Hebrew school, they go to Hebrew school, and they throw them into the middle of the book of Leviticus, and which shows them about their relationship with God. And also what they do is they teach them the Hebrew letters, the building blocks of their language, and they drizzle honey on it so the children, as they're learning their Hebrew letters, they're learning how sweet the letters of Torah are. Where I was going to go with that. From a scientific viewpoint, we look at atoms as the building blocks of creation, right? We look at atoms, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen is making up the air that we breathe, or whatever, iron making up the metal on the seats. But from a Hebraic, biblical, spiritual viewpoint, they look at the Hebrew letters themselves as the building blocks for creation. Because it was with those letters that God spoke the world into existence. He spoke creation into existence using the letters of the Hebrew language. So I printed off a whole bunch of the sheets, and I will hand those out in a minute. I want to talk about some study skills that have just helped me along the way. Keep in mind that everyone might be different. So take what works for you, what you don't work, throw it out. I'm trying to grow in my walk with God and my knowledge of who my Father is. So whatever blesses you, blesses you. The biggest question we always ask ourselves, and even the rabbis will ask when you talk to them about Torah, they have a book. The rabbis have a lot of books, but one of the writings they have is called Ethics of Our Fathers. And in Pirkei Avot, that is the Ethics of Our Fathers, the rabbis ask a very interesting question. They say, why should we study? And what happens, what is the viewpoint of someone who's studying Scripture? Are you studying it to teach? Or are you studying it for its own sake? And you should study it for its own sake. Because if you study it to sound smart to other people, or you're studying it because you want to sound right or whatnot, and you're missing the point. But if you're studying it because it's beautiful, and even if you were locked in a cave and you could never study anything but the Torah, you'd still study it anyway because it's absolutely awesome, right? That's the reason why we study, because it's the living foundation that shows us who our God is. It is the written foundation of the whole world. Yeshua is the living Torah. He's the living version of the Torah. But when you study the Torah, you're getting a picture about who God is and what his nature is. So if you're a child of God, God says, we are known as God's children because we have a heart in us that says, Abba, Father. We cry, Abba, Father. So if you have a relationship with God and you want to know God, know him and seek his face, then you'll study Torah. And you'll study it for its own sake because it's the language of your God, because it's the foundation that God chose to reveal himself to the world. It's kind of interesting because if you count out all the words in Torah, the midpoint is actually two words repeated, darash, darash. It means search, search. And you read Psalms 1, it says you are to meditate on Torah day and night. And recently I was reading about King David in the Midrash. It talked about how he went to bed like about what we would call 7, 8 o'clock, but he would actually rise at midnight. And his harp would hang by the window, and the wind would come through the window and blow the strings on the harp, and that's when he knew to arise to study Torah in the middle of the night. And he would wake up in the middle of the night. And a lot of the times we wake up in the middle of the night, right? David knew during that time when he woke up in the middle of the night, it was time to study in Torah or worship God. And that's when a lot of his psalms were written. So why do we study Torah? Ultimately to connect with God. So today, hopefully these are some of the study tools I want to share with you. Here's some books that have helped me along the way. I forgot to bring these books, I realized. Can you guys see my mouse? Can you see it? Okay, so I am pointing to this book. This book is where it all began for me. Zola's Introduction to Hebrew. I had been watching, when my family and I first started studying the Hebrew roots of our faith, right? 2013, it is March, and my family and I decide, my mom actually feels like God has spoken to her that we need to look into the roots of the Hebrew faith. And so we have our first Passover. We start watching Zola 11 Ministries videos, and I'm like, I want to learn Hebrew because that's the language of the Bible. So what I got for I was still in high school, so I got this book. And what it did is I'll show you the website that goes along with this book. And to be honest, I'll let you in on this little secret. Having the book is awesome, but you can get everything that's in the book on the website for free. The guy, John Parsons, who writes this, has a website called Hebrew for Christians. And everything that's in the book and then more is on his website because like the rest of us, he's growing in his walk, he's growing in his faith, and he's growing in his knowledge of Torah and his knowledge of God. So he's adding to his website as he's going along and studying. So there's a lot in this book. There's even more on his website. And he also has worksheets. And this book over here that you see, Biblical Hebrew, this is by Dr. Danny Ben-Gigi. This shows, take what you like, take what you don't like. This book was really helpful for me because it contained a lot of charts. I'm a charts kind of guy. So when I'm trying to learn like biblical grammar, I like charts. I like seeing where, okay, this is first person singular, first person masculine. I like seeing that broken out. He had a lot of pictures in it, and my mom and I were comparing notes. She really didn't like that there was a lot going on, which makes sense. Okay. Oh, that's a car. Okay. Kind of distracted me a little. But anyway, take what you like, whatever works for you. But these two books are kind of where it started for me. Another thing that helped me along the way in learning biblical Hebrew, this is a homeschool primer, so a lot of us homeschool. So the big drawback to like homeschooling our kids, right, and wanting to teach them the biblical languages is there's really not a lot of information regarding teaching biblical Hebrew. The only place really to go to learn biblical Hebrew is at a university. And your students that you're trying to teach Hebrew, they're not going to be able to take a university class. So Kim McKay, she wrote a book, The Homeschool Primer, and this is what is over here. And I'll bring these books Saturday, when we have this class Saturday, for you guys to look at. And this book was really helpful for my younger siblings as they were learning. And I started, because I had taken Zola's Introduction to Hebrew, I was able to jump into this book and learn a little bit of grammar. I did not complete it all the way, just kind of because where I was at the time. But I was able to complete a lot, and it helped me learn. I kind of went through a period of my life where I kind of stepped away from the faith a little bit. About a couple years, I rededicated my life to Yeshua, and I stepped back into studying Hebrew, and it was like having the relationship with God there made it all come to life. And like, you can try to fill your brain with head knowledge, but when you have the heart to accept it and you're fertile soil for God, He will work with that. All right, I have this here. What I'm going to do is just click escape, and I'm going to go to palim.com. Conjugation tables. There's so much ads on here. But what you can do, if you are reading, this is a big Hebrew study tool. Let's say I'm reading one of these Bibles here, and I find a word, and I want to find out what tense it is. So I'm going to pick kura. Yikra. He will call, right? I want to find out what tense it is. This comes up. I can go here, and it will show me all the charts. Close. It will show me all the charts. Oh no. Ads. Close the ads. All the charts. Right here. Right here. It shows me all the charts. All the charts. Right here. So, and that will show me just biblical Hebrew charts. But you probably won't need that yet. That's kind of like helped me. The biggest thing that will probably help you, and I use a lot, is Blue Letter Bible. Who uses Blue Letter Bible? Who uses Blue Letter Bible? Okay, a couple of people over there. Hands down, my favorite biblical studies tool. Hands down. And I'll show you what I mean. So, anyone pick a favorite verse in the Old Testament verse? Someone pick a favorite Old Testament verse. Psalms 1:1. Okay, Psalms 1-1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. So I put it right up here, and I typed it in. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. I click Tools, and it will pull up the Hebrew for that verse that I'm studying. It will show me each word. I can click on each word. It will show me and tell me what the grammar is for that word. It'll give me the Strong's reference, and it'll do it for like every word in the sentence, showing me what the original word is, right? That is the word in the sentence. And it'll show me its root down here. And that is a big tool that I use when studying a verse. So right now, I'm going to show you all my technical tools, and then after this, I'm going to show you some of my tools that I use, strategies. Sepharia is my biggest tool, hands down. I love it even more than I love Blue Letter Bible, and I'll show you why. Who's used Sepharia? No one. Okay, that's all right. Sepharia is a collection of biblical commentary, Jewish commentary. It has the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the Midrash, which Mishnah, that's going to be, you had on the Temple Mount, you had your priesthood, right? You had your priesthood that ran. So the Israelites were broken up into 3 people groups. You had the regular Israelites, you had the Levites, And then the Levites had 3 families. And inside one of those 3 families, you had the priesthood, inside the family of Kohath. And it was not all of the family of Kohath. It was only from the line of Aaron that you had the priesthood. And on this Temple Mount, from these 3 families, you would have the elders of Israel that would meet on the Temple Mount, and they were called the Sanhedrin. In Deuteronomy 17, it talks about a group of people who were designated, the elders who were designated for writing out and deciding what the times and seasons were and the practices for following Torah. The Sanhedrin was responsible for that. They were the court. Because sometimes when you have 613 commandments, there arises situations like, what exactly does it mean not to boil a kid in its mother's milk? And sometimes we can be like, or even, okay, we're told to offer a lamb on the Temple Mount for an olah, that is a burnt offering, but we're not really told much. What we all could come up with our own explanations for what we want to do, and I'm sure there's pretty good ideas, but you would want the wisest, most learned men of the nations, the elders, men who walk with God, who've studied Torah all their lives, men who've actually lived out Torah most of their lives, to be the ones writing out the regulations. For instance, think of it in our country, in the United States of America. The president signs into a law, right? The Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, right? Civics 101. They pass bills. They go to the president. The president signs the bills into law once they pass the House of Representatives and Senate. Many times, these bills need agencies to enforce them. These new laws need agencies to enforce them. So you have the FDA, the USDA, and the EPA, and all these agencies, the FBI, that enforce these laws. And there are regulations that these agencies use. The system that God chose to use with the Israelites was the Sanhedrin. So the Mishnah is going to be the rulings of the Sanhedrin and the debates amongst the Sanhedrin members regarding different areas of Torah law. So when you're studying commandments and Torah, the 613 commandments, understanding how the elders of Israel thought about the Torah, understanding what they thought, what they saw, and what they enforced upon the people will help you understand the historical context of how people lived in Yeshua's day. The Talmud will be more extensive debates on what's going on in the Mishnah, and the Midrash will be interpretations upon Torah stories, biblical texts, using stories, parables, and legal deductions. You have halakha, you have liturgy, you got more of these. But honestly, just staying in the Tanakh, that is the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, that's the Old Testament, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Mishnah, Talmud, and Midrash, that is a lot. Even just focusing on the Torah, there's so much there. So Sepharia is probably the best tool for looking into those areas. I am going to use this Saturday's, this Sabbath portion as an example. Exodus 33, verse 12. Here's another way you can use Sepharia that's helpful. This is why I use Sepharia. So let's say I'm reading Exodus 33, verse 12, and I want to know what this means. I can use those areas I talked about, those sources that I talked about, including commentary for each verse. See, I have 66 sources from Hebrew Jewish sources available just for this verse right here in this column, if you guys see my mouse. I have Rashi, who's probably, that's going to be like 1,000, 1,200, 1,100 AD. Ibn Ezra, Rambam, Sforno, these are probably the most well-regarded commentaries. I have Talmud, Midrash, Halakha, Targums are another powerful tool that I use. That's basically in 1st and 2nd century, not Christianity, but Judaism. You had members amongst the Jewish community writing out the Targums. Those are the Aramaic translations of the Torah. So when you are wondering, I wonder what the culture of the Bible, how it views the Bible. You can look at the Aramaic Targums to get a big picture of what the people of the Bible's culture think about the Bible. It's all about historical context. It's like a couple hundred years from now, if they're wondering what in the world a Coke is, or they're wondering what in the world a touchdown is, or what in the world an alley hoop is, they're going to study our culture and realize, or what's a term from a generation, could be any generation in this room, like just an idiom. That's cool. We're not literally meaning it's freezing in the room. It's raining cats and dogs. So we study a lot of this commentary. We study a lot of the onkelos, right? All these Aramaic translations when studying the Torah because it gives us a context into that culture. When we try to superimpose our Western American values on the Torah, we get kind of wacky doctrines, and we come to crazy conclusions because we are Westerners trying to impose our values on Torah people. Never mind the fact that we're coming from the Roman culture, which runs completely opposite to the biblical culture, which is a Hebrew culture. There's so much about our culture that is Roman. And when you study the words of the rabbis, even, they'll talk about how they hated the Roman ideology. And that's kind of the ideology that we've embraced, unknowingly in so many ways. And so when we're studying Torah, it's good to look at the Torah from the perspective of the people who grew up in the Torah and had that Torah handed down to them from their father, their fathers before them, from their fathers before them, all the way back to Mount Sinai. So that's why I use Sepharia. I'm trying to think of, let me go back. Sepharia as a tool. I went over this. So this is what I use. Let me get a drink. Yeah. Yes. You don't have to pay. Now, here's the thing. Around every holiday, or even every once in a blue moon, they kind of ask you to donate. So you get pop-ups asking them to donate. I've thought about donating. I haven't donated yet. But yeah, it's a free resource. There's been such an expansion in wealth and knowledge. Even the Jewish community talks about how there's been an expansion in knowledge of Torah. Because what I just mentioned on Sepharia.com, you guys just saw, is at my fingertips. When I'm at home, all I have to do is open up my laptop or even scroll on my phone because I have the Sepharia app on my phone. And that's at my fingertips. In Yeshua's day, this kind of stuff is what you had to go to your rabbi, and you would sit under him and you would listen super hard for all this kind of stuff. And your rabbi would tell you it. and you would try to remember really hard, and your rabbi would kind of speak in a melodic tone while he's telling you. That way you would remember the melody and kind of help you memorize what he was saying word for word. And then when you were old enough to be a rabbi, you would do the same for your student. You didn't have it at this, and it was a lot more difficult. And then the Talmud, the Mishnah, and those oral explanations of the Torah, and even the Tanakh itself, during the Middle Ages, because of what the Catholic Church was doing, even the whole Reformation movement was based off of this. The Catholic Church, the main state-instituted church, suppressing a lot of information. And the Jewish community, they talk about how the Catholic Church would come in and they would gather all their written copies of the Talmud and burn them. All their commentaries, they would grab them and have big burn piles because they considered they were heretical. So this information that we have today that we are blessed with is, it is pretty powerful that we have this at our fingertips. I want to talk about my Hebraic toolbox. One thing I look at when I'm using all these tools and I'm studying a Torah portion every week. A Torah portion, basically, they take the first 5 books of the Bible, which is called the Torah, and they break it into about 3 to 5 chapters every week, and they study it. The rule when I'm reading a verse and I notice a phrase stands out to me, I follow the rule of first mention. I immediately think, blue letter Bible, I'm going to type it in, the Hebrew phrase in, the Hebrew words, and I'm going to look to see where this word first occurred. I'm also going to be studying the different levels. So when I am studying it, I am keeping in mind that there's a Peshat level. That's this right here, if you see where my mouse is. The Peshat is the surface level. So what I'm reading, there's a surface level to it. There's a remez. I'm keeping in mind that what I'm reading also ties to something else that occurs somewhere in the Bible. There's thematic connections. Drash and Soda are the deeper levels. So I am keeping in mind there's always something deeper. And sometimes I recognize that I'm not studied enough, so I keep studying the Peshat and Remez before I can get to the Drash, and I can start making those conclusions. But what helps you get to those deeper levels when studying Torah is looking at the Hebrew words and letters themselves. The Hebrew letters themselves have numerical design, numerical value of their number, the numerical value of the Hebrew letters has a meaning. The design of the letters has a meaning. The placement where those letters are placed on a Torah scroll in context to the other letters in the verses, those have meaning. They have word meanings. So the Yod also means Yad, which means hand. Beit, which is the letter for B, also means Bait, which is house. Dalet, which is the letter for D, also means door or a poor person. Hey means here, revelation, here is. It makes something defined. So these words have meanings, and even the size of the letters. There'll be letters that have the normal size, but every once in a while you'll see a small letter on a Torah scroll or a big letter. Like the first letter of the Torah is, the first verse, Genesis 1:1, is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you take Bereshit, which is in the beginning, and the B in Bereshit is a large bait. It's large compared to the extra letters. What that's showing us is pay attention. Why is there a big B? Pay attention to the number of verses in your Torah portion. This is a lot of stuff we're reading we don't even think about. We don't even think about to count out the number of verses in the Torah portion. But that's actually one thing that the rabbis do. Is last week we went over the Torah portion of tzav. The Hebrew word for tzadeh and the word tzav, it's the Hebrew letter. So the Hebrew word tzav, command, it says command Aaron and his sons, right? Tzav, and it says tzav, it's two letters. It's a sadi and a beit. The tzadeh has a numerical value of 90. The vav has the beit has a numerical value of, it's actually a vav. It's 96 is the numerical value. Yeah. So I'll pull it up actually. Torah portion. Let me escape. Torah portion tzav. Portion tzav. I'll show you. Torah portion tzav. Wrong. Let me go back. That would be Leviticus 6. Tzav. Let me pull up the Hebrew. You can pull up the Hebrew and Sepharia. I'm in Sepharia. So we're going to look. I'm going to expand. This word right here. That's a tzadi, and that is a vav. The tzadi has a numerical value of 90. The vav has a numerical value of 6. This is the Torah portion of tzav, and underneath it, the tzadi is a patek vowel. So the tzadi makes tz. Everyone kind of make that ts sound. Tz, tz. And underneath the tzadi is a patek vowel. A patek vowel makes an ah sound. So everyone go tz, ah, ah. And then you have the vav, which makes a sound of v. So tz, ah, v. Tzav. Tzav. So the tzadi has a numerical value of 90, and the vav has a numerical value of 6. The word has a numerical value of 96. The whole Torah portion, you want to guess how many? 96 verses. Nothing. I was thinking the other day, because sometimes I have these conversations in my head while I'm like doing the dishes or doing something or even just working or whatnot. I was thinking, because I was trying to comprehend how God created the universe. You know, it's hard to believe sometimes when you look out. Like my brain can't even comprehend when I look at a cornfield or think of the whole big universe. God made this, because it's just so big. And then you begin to wonder, how do I know God is real? And then I look at the Torah and I'm like, that's how I know. Because every time I look at the way it's built and designed, I'm like, no human could have come up with this. And so this Torah portion, which is in Leviticus, in the middle of Leviticus 6, and it's actually 6 chapters long. Maybe not 6 chapters. I think it's about 3.5. But it has 96 verses in it. So pay attention to the number of verses in your Torah portion. We'll pay attention to the number of verses. Also on a Torah scroll, when we read our Bibles, a lot of us read the New King James English Bible. We miss so much when we read the English. Your Bible is supposed to originally have been read on a Torah scroll, on a scroll, where you read it and it has a layout. Because when it's written on a Torah scroll, the way it's supposed to be written, you notice things like, I don't have a Torah scroll up. Maybe I can go to my bookmarks. Let me go to my bookmarks. Let me go to bookmarks. Yes. I actually found a website, and maybe I can have someone post this on Facebook. But I actually found a website that has printed copies of Torah scrolls. Yay. So, let me go to the text. Anyway, I won't waste your time on this. But when I am looking at, this is actually, they were able to take screenshots of a Torah scroll, an actual kosher Torah scroll. And when you look at the layout, you have sometimes the parting of the Red Sea that is in Exodus 15. Did you know that the Song of Moses is written in such a way that you have one column? It's actually 3 columns. You have one column on the right, one column in the middle, and one column in the left. What it's supposed to represent is while you're singing the song, you're supposed to be thinking about the crossing of the Red Sea. And this is on a Torah scroll, and you would miss it if you're reading Exodus 15 in your King James Bible or your NIV, because it's not written that way. But when you read the original Hebrew, it's actually written that way, and the words are written that way with a purpose. And you're reading not only the black letters themselves, but you're reading the white space too. And that has meaning. So the number of verses and the layout of how the verses are written is important. Another tool I use, I look for 2 identical words in 2 passages. We already talked about this when I talked about the layers of studying Torah. When I'm reading a verse, like today we're going to practice reading Exodus 12. If we have enough time. Who knows? But when you read today's Torah portion, that is, I'll explain that in a minute. But when you read today's Torah portion, you'll come to 2 words that it begins with. So what I did to help me understand that better was I was like, where do I see that elsewhere? And I was able to go to the end of Genesis in chapter 45, and I was able to go in Jeremiah and get an idea of, let's pause a minute. Did you know, Marcel, that was so good we had to stop and take a picture? Another thing I like to do is I like to ask, there are 613 commandments in Torah. So when I'm reading a passage, sometimes I'll ask, what biblical law are they talking about best? So when the children of Israel sin with the golden calf and Moses comes down with the tablets and he's throwing the tablets down and he grinds up the golden calf and makes the children of Israel drink it, what biblical law does that sound like? The sota. The rabbis actually make that connection. That it's the law, the sota, but they don't know if she's committed adultery or not. So what they do is yeah.
Because Israel was acting like an adulterous. Oh, wow.
So yeah, when the children of Israel sin with that, right, they're unfaithful to God. So what does Moses make them do to prove their innocence, the ones that are left? They drink the water tainted with the ashes of the golden calf. So that's what you're looking for when you're studying the Torah is what Torah commandment. There are positive commandments which tell you to do something, and there are negative commandments which tell you not to do something. So when you're reading Torah stories, ask yourself, what Torah commandment is it talking about? Look for common themes. Sometimes you'll be reading a Torah portion, and it's good to read the Haftarah, which is the corresponding prophet or writings readings. And they will tell you a lot. When you're reading from the book of Isaiah and you're studying this week's Torah portion, you're like, that makes sense. I brought like a whole bunch of Midrash commentary, my Midrash commentary set. And it's been eye-opening reading it because the Hebrew way of studying Torah is the foundation. So when they're studying Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, or even the Psalms or a Proverbs, connecting it back to the Torah. Always connect it back to the Torah. Always connect it back to the people in the Torah. Or always connect it back to what you're studying that week in that week's Torah portion. If you're reading from Psalms 24, always connect it back to the Torah portion. And you start reading, it changes the way you read Proverbs. Even reading the Song of Solomon's, which is kind of like, it's changed the way reading Song of the Solomons, because you realize Song of Solomon's isn't about necessarily a romantic relationship between a man and woman who are in love. It's about God's relationship with the children of Israel and the temple and the sanctity of the temple. So I look for common themes. Another thing I do is I ask what passages follow and what passages precede and what passages come after. So when I'm studying a portion, I'm thinking, what just happened? The way, when we write stories in books, right? When we are, Where the Red Fern Grows, Charlotte's Web, these books have paragraphs. Torah scrolls have paragraphs too. When they're writing, the Torah portion will talk about how one thing happened, and then the story will change and focus on another person. Like the Torah portion, Vayera. It was talking about Abraham. It opens up with Abraham's encounter with the God and the two angels. And then it talks about God's exchange with Abraham. And then talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's whole situation. Then it talks about Isaac's birth. Then it goes on later in the Torah portion to talk about the Akedah, which is the offering up of Isaac. Different themes throughout. So it breaks it up into paragraphs. And if you were reading a Torah scroll, you would see these paragraphs. So what you do is, if you're on paragraph number 9 in the Torah portion, or even if you're on paragraph number 1 in the Torah portion, you ask, what was the paragraph before this paragraph talking about? Sometimes there's no break in the paragraphs. So the last Torah portion in the book of Genesis, the last 2 Torah portions, there should be a space about 9 letters in between those 2 paragraphs, but they're made into one paragraph, which shows you that the doors are closing behind the children of Israel as they're coming into Egypt. And they can't really go out until God delivers them out. And I'll explain that more another time. But the layout of the paragraphs, what happens before what I'm reading, and what I'm reading now, they tie together. So I kind of took up 50 minutes of time. What I wanted to do was I really wanted to take up 20 minutes of time and kind of give you guys an opportunity to practice. Do you guys want to ask, like maybe discuss and chew over what we talked about more? Do you want to practice, or do you want to I know you wanted to see Paleo Hebrew. What do you guys want to do? I'm trying to keep this as informal as possible. What do you want to do?
Do you have a list of the references that you study?
I do in my slides. So, through a verse. Okay. Let me go to kabad.org. Kabad.org. I'll go to Pesach Torah readings. Passover Torah reading. And I'm going to pick, today's the first day of Passover if you're going off of the Hillel. So, okay. So we're going to look at this verse right here. Exodus chapter 12. And this was the one I was talking about earlier. So, I'm going to go here, type in. I'm in Safari right now. Exodus 12. What verse was it? 21. So you can tell this pay surrounded here is just telling me it's the end of the paragraph. So that's where the paragraph would end. So the paragraph ended on verse 20. So that's telling me that verse 21 is a new paragraph. I'm going to can you guys see fine? All right. So I'm going to read it. Vayikra Moshe l'chol ziknei Yisrael. So Moses summoned all the elders of Israel. Vayomer alechem, and said to them, Mishchu echu, go, pick out. So there's draw out and take for yourselves tson, flock animals, lemishpechotechem, that is for your families, v'shachatu, that is you all will slaughter chapasech. You will slaughter the Passover. So right away, it's telling me he calls out the elders of Israel and says to them, what does he say? Mishchu uchu. So I'm going to pull up commentary real quick. Pull up commentary using Sofaria. This is what I do. I'm like, okay. I study mainly Rashi is the biggest one I study because he studies mainly surface level. He's going to tell you what the literal meaning of what's going on, what it literally means. He says, mishchu, this word mishchu right here that I'm circling, means to draw out. He who has sheep, let him draw one out from his own. All right. So that's telling me he who has a sheep, let him draw out from his own flock. Ukhu lachem. Or take. He who has no sheep, let him purchase one at the market. So if you don't have a flock of sheep, go purchase one. And it says, lemishpachotam. This corresponds to, say, levet avot. That is for a house of the fathers. So right away, what this is telling me is you have to bring, when you are slaughtering the Passover lamb, you have to bring a Passover lamb that you own. Either you buy it or you already own it. You can't bring another person's lamb. And so I'm taking the surface level, which is you have to take from your sheep or buy it. And then, if I can find it, I have a copy of the Exodus Rabbah, right here, the Midrash Rabbah. What I'm going to do to find a deeper layer of that is I'm going to find, okay, the Torah portion for this week, I know this is in Torah portion Bo. I kind of did. The more you guys spend studying the Torah, when you do it year after year, you will know automatically when you read, okay, I know Genesis 19 is Torah portion Vayera. I know Genesis 9 is Torah portion Noach. So you guys this is the benefit of studying Torah portions every year. Because when you get on God's calendar, these things start to become ingrained in you. Not just the festival days, not just the weekly Sabbath, but also the Torah gets ingrained in you because every year you're going through the whole Torah and you're going on God's calendar. So I'm going to read from the Midrash Rabbah. All right? And I'm looking for... Summon 9. This Torah portion, this would be in the weekly Torah portion of Bo. So, if you want, you guys can go to Exodus 12:21. All right. I found it right here. Another tool that I found online, and Mike and I were talking about this. So who's heard of Eddie Chumney? Eddie Chumney is an awesome teacher. For a while I've been saving up to take his class, and I had to like temporarily withdraw from it because I'm budgeting and stuff. But when I studied in his class, I noticed that he cited a lot from the Midrash Rabbah. So I was like, where in the world are you getting your sources? And he told me, he said he found online, he found this on like Amazon, Soncino Midrash Rabbah. It's Soncino, Soncino Midrash Rabbah. This is the collection of the debates of the rabbis on the stories of the Torah and their explanations. And he found a 10-volume set. And so Mike was like asking me where I got it, and I was telling him, Eddie told me to get this. So he got it, and he only got, how many did you get?
They only sent me 7.
They only sent him 7 of the 10. So he was missing 3 of the books. So I would check with this first. Art Scroll offers like a 13, 14, 17 volume books. It's the same books, but they're broken up into smaller bite-sized pieces. Yeah. But the thing with Art Scroll, when you're buying all these books like Mishnah, Midrash, or Talmud, or even just rabbinic commentary, Rashi, it's expensive. So this is why I use Safaria, but if we're going to a day, I'm slowly adding to my book library, because if we go to a day where we lose technology and we have no technology, having it in book form will be valuable. But for right now, for the penniless little 25-year-old guy, this is actually helping me out. So I'm going to read from the Midrash. It says, so right here it says, if you see my notes, mishchu, draw out and take. So going to page 208, it says, draw out and take for yourselves lambs. Drawing away your hands from idolatry is what it means by drawing out. And taking for yourselves lambs means slaying the gods of Egypt. This is from the Midrash. It's saying, draw yourselves away from idolatry. That's what it means. Because this passage could just say, kill the lamb you have. And if you don't have one, buy it. It could have just literally said that. We didn't have to look at Rashi. It could have just said that. But God chose to have Moses record this in such a way that we can draw a deeper meaning. And what it's telling us, and when it's saying mishchu, when it's saying draw out, it's saying draw yourselves away from idolatry. Whatever is in your life that is an idol, turn away from it. Uchu. And take the flock animal. Why? Because the Egyptians worshipped cattle. That's why it was an abomination to sacrifice sheep or cattle or any animal in Goshen in the land of Egypt. Because the Egyptians would be like, you're sacrificing our gods. The Egyptians were actually vegetarians for the most part. The reason why they was because they believed that sheep, any cattle animal was a god. They worshiped the crocodile, they worshiped the Nile, they worshiped the sun, and they worshiped their flock animals. So what's going on here is so much is going on. When they're drawing away from idolatry, what God needs them to do before they can be redeemed is they have to drop the idols that are in their hands. Literally. Drop it. And then you have to kill the idols that are in your life. You have to decide that it is more important to love God than the idols that are in your life. Here's another thing. To kill the sheep in the land of Egypt was a risky thing. So when did they kill the sheep? While the Egyptians were there. So that took courage to do that. And the rabbis commentate on that. So while they're killing the lamb, they put its blood on the doorposts and they're having their dinner meal. And the Lord passes over their houses. The Egyptians see two things. Firstborn being killed. They worship firstborn. Pharaoh's the firstborn. He's the only firstborn alive, though. And they also see the gods, their sheep gods, right? Their gods of their cattle, the gods of their livestock, dead. So they realize we're next. So they're being broken on all layers. Here's another way I can study this. If I use Blue Letter Bible, I can take mishchu, which means to draw, and I'm like, okay, where in the world do I see this before? So I take Sepharia, I'd go to the Hebrew text, I copy mishchu, which means draw. I go to Blue Letter Bible, copy and paste, and I click search. Okay, it's telling me this word mishchu in this verb tense, it's not necessarily the word mashach is the root word, so that could occur more than 2 times. That could occur like 9, 8 times in the Torah. But this progression of letters, the mem, the shin, the kaf, and the vav that make the sound mishchu, that only appears 2 times in the Torah. So that's what it's telling me. It's telling me it appears in Exodus 12:21, which is our verse, and it also appears in Ezekiel 32, verse 20. Those 4 letters in that order. So I'm like, okay, how do I connect these 2 verses together? Let's go. What's Exodus 12:21? What's the context? Draw and take out lambs. You're slaughtering the Passover lamb. Okay. Let's go to Ezekiel 32, verse 20. And I'm going to increase the zoom. That way we all can see it. So this is the Hebrew verse. And I won't try to read it all, but I'm going to read the English. They will fall in the midst of them that are slain by the sword. She is delivered to the sword. Draw her and all out in her multitudes. You all heard that. Someone go to Ezekiel 32 and kind of read the surrounding verses around it. See what it's talking about. See what it's talking about. Open up your Bible. It could be the English. It's context. There's a reason why. Ezekiel 32, verse 20. Yeah, and to give you guys an idea, I limited my study on this day's Torah portion. That way I'm kind of studying it with you guys right now. That way I'm just showing you how I'm breaking this apart when I'm studying. The lamentation for the fall of Egypt is literally what it's talking about. Batok chalele cheref yipolu cheref nitana mashku. It's not mishkeu, it's mashku otavcho hamonecha. So it's literally saying mashku. What is the mashku part? Draw her and all her multitudes. What are she being drawn out and delivered to? Cherev, the sword. So it's talking about Egypt. So what's going on in Exodus 12, verse 21 is we're talking about Egypt being defeated. See, this lamb if you're reading the surface level, you're bringing your lamb, right? You're bringing it to slaughter, and then you're going to take the blood and put it on the doorposts, right? Mishchu. All right, let's take ukhu, because it could just say ukhu. Why? It could have just said ukhu, take for yourselves, because passages, or kahu. The vav before means and. So where I'm going? I'll go to Blue Letter Bible again. Guys, I love Blue Letter Bible. It's like my best friend. So, Genesis 45:18. Okay, let me look at this verse. Someone read that verse. English. Yeah. Read 17. Read 17 and 18 together because they flow together.
Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan. And bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat land.
All right. Ukhu et avichem, and take your father, ve'et betechem, and your households, uvo'u elai, and come to me. Ve'etanai lechem, I will give to you et tuv eretz Mitzrayim, ve'ichlu et chelev haaretz. That is literally the promise of Egypt to the children of Israel. Come to me, and you will eat the fat of the land, and you will eat the best of the land. That's the promise. So right now, I'm not making necessarily any conclusions. I'm like, okay, laws of first mention. You see where I'm going. I'm not necessarily making any conclusions. I'm just like, okay. Because right now, I'm studying with you guys right now. I haven't really looked at this too much. I kind of cheated, and I looked at it a little bit yesterday. But I haven't really looked at it that much. I'm like, okay. So I'm going to go back to Exodus 12:21. That's our verse for today. So Mishchu, what it's talking about literally is Egypt is being destroyed as you're taking out these lambs. Ukhu. And not only is Egypt being destroyed, but with it, the promise that Egypt gave that they lied on. And what was that promise? That if we came to the land, we'd eat the good of the land and we'd have the good life. And really what this redemption process is us turning away from the idols. Why? Because why did we go into idolatry? Why did we allow the secret sins to come into our lives? Why did we give in to the Yetzer Hara? I was watching a show with my mom yesterday. We have a winter tradition. We love watching Lark Rise to Candleford. We love British TV. It's a period piece. It's awesome. Who's seen like Downton Abbey? Probably. Downton Abbey. It's kind of like a period piece like Downton Abbey. It's a little before Downton Abbey, staged in the 1890s. Two towns, Candleford, which is kind of like an uppity small town, but they're all well-to-do, and Lark Rise, which is, they're the country bumpkins who live in the small country hamlet. They all work on the farm. And these two towns come together because the girl from Lark Rise, who's smarter than everyone in her small little hamlet, is going places. She works in the post office with Dorcas Lane, the postmistress, in Candleford, and all the characters are woven together. Well, anyway, there's this one character named Twister Turl. And Twister, he's this kind of like old man, but he's sly, always trying to get out of work, and he claims his rheumatism. is the excuse. Really, he's a drunkard. But that's what his character is. So Queenie, his wife, they're obviously not kosher. She gets a pig. She wins a pig in the fair. And so she's like, I'm going to share this with our poor neighbors. And Twister's like, okay. Well, the people in Candleford who are not as poor want the pig. So they go to Twister and they're like, your wife has a pig she won. We want to have some of that pig too. Will you sell us some of the pig? And he's like, no, my Queenie said don't sell the pig. And he's like, in his twisted mind kind of way, like, no. And so he says no, even though he wants the money because he wants to take the money to the pub and drink it on beer. He says no, and his character is like, it's awesome. It's awesome. And I did the right thing, and he feels awesome about himself. And he tells his wife, hey, I did this awesome thing, and if people told me that being good all my life felt like this, I would have been good all my life. But eventually, to spoil the story, the people keep coming to him with more and more money, and he finally gives in and sells part of the pig to them. And down the drain goes his good intentions. So the question, the reason why I'm telling that story is because what does Egypt promise us? Comfort, the good life, and it appeals to what we desire. And the rabbis have an interesting saying. They say we every day are to remember coming out of Egypt. Every day we're to remember. Not just Passover. Not just on this week of unleavened bread are we to remember coming out of Egypt. We're also to remember every day. Because we're also supposed to remember that even though our ancestors were the ones who came out of Egypt, each and every one of us has our own personal Egypt. And we came into Egypt because we thought we were getting sold something good. But really what we were getting was enslaved. We were promised pleasure when really we were sold slavery. We were sold into slavery. And that's really what this is dealing with right here. It's defeating the gods they sold themselves to. Because they didn't just sell themselves to the physical Egyptians. They sold themselves to the god system. They sold themselves to the pagan system of Egypt. Because when it talks about later, when the king of Egypt is coming after them, what the rabbis say, when they're at the sea and they see the king of Egypt coming at them, what they're talking about is the guardian angel of Egypt coming after them. That's the king of Egypt. We talk about the prince of Persia that keeps Gabriel from seeing Daniel in the book of Daniel. It's the same principle here in Egypt. They really, by turning away from idolatry, mishchuekhu, what they are doing here is they are cutting off ties with that spiritual entity which has been oppressing them. They're cutting off the legal ground with that. And they're cutting that off, and they're declaring their allegiance to God. They're deciding, I'm no longer afraid of that, and I'm no longer afraid of the Egyptians who enforced that. We're going to slaughter this Passover lamb even though there's a risk of losing our own lives. We're going to apply it to our doorposts and watch what God does. It's kind of interesting because mishchuekhu also means you are to take. And I'm going to go to Leviticus chapter 1. Because this is also another way of looking at it. Leviticus 1. How do I know that? In my mind, I'm thinking mishchuekhu means take it from your flock and draw it and buy if you don't have anyone. So you know you're bringing your own flock animal too. Yes, so in my mind, I already have been to Leviticus chapter 1, Torah portion, Vayikra, You see what I'm doing here? I'm drawing from other Torah portions. I'm drawing from other scriptures, and I'm bringing it here. And I'm remembering verse. It says, Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta alechem, you will speak to them, saying, Adam ki akriv michen karban. If a man brings his offering from among them to Hashem. And I remembered the commentary on this when I studied this Torah portion. Rashi had an interesting commentary right here. So I remember this because I clicked on this right here. It says, this is the term for man. Why is this term for man employed here? Since Adam also means Adam, suggests that the characteristic of the first man, Adam, was as follows. He did not offer a sacrifice of anything acquired by the way of robbery, since everything was his. That's why it says Adam ki akriv. Because if a man brings, if an Adam brings an offering, Adam, everything he brought, he was the only human alive at the time, so everything he brought was his. So you too shall not offer anything acquired by the way of robbery. And he quotes the Talmud on that. So, what he's saying here is an important part of the korbanot. That's Torah portion Vayikra, which is introducing the korbanot, which are the sacrifices. He's saying that in order for you to bring an offering, it has to be your own offering. I can't bring a sheep that I stole from Blaze and bring it to the altar and say, God, here's my offering. God's going to be like, that's a stolen offering. That doesn't belong on my altar. Get that out of here. It's not fit to be sacrificed. In the same way, you can't borrow other people's faith. You can't borrow the religion of someone else. If you're a child, you can't borrow your parents' religion. Your faith has to be your own. Your walk with God has to be your own. You can't come to church like I have sometimes done and not been right with God and act like you are right with God. Because your faith, you have to do the business yourself. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, I would have to. That's another path if we had more time. How much time do we have left? I'm in the negative, so I'm going to try to wrap it up. We'll wrap it up right now. But I'll wrap up with this. Going back to, I'm going to go back to our verse in Exodus. Exodus 21. Their way out of Egypt is each man taking responsibility for their own part. And each man applying the doorpost to his family's house. That's their way of taking responsibility with their own lamb. And for us, daily, we remember coming out of Egypt. We come out of Egypt daily, right? That's our reminder. That if we're in like a season where maybe we're not close to God, it's our responsibility to get close to God. It's our responsibility to be like, what are the barriers keeping me between God? Keeping me from God? What are the barriers in between me and God right now? And what can I do to remove those barriers? And Passover is all about asking what those barriers are. It's about getting that chametz out, right? It's about removing that. Because when you draw and take your lambs, the Passover lamb, what you're saying is, my allegiance is no longer to Egypt. My allegiance is no longer to Babylon. It's no longer to Rome. The leopard doesn't change its spots. Maybe the Egyptians worshipped the livestock, but maybe the Israelites worshiped the livestock in a different way. Maybe they looked to the livestock as their source of provision. By bringing your own lamb, by bringing something that's costly, what you are doing is you are saying, God, I'm going to trust you to be the provider of my needs. And you're my leader, you're my follower. Maybe the material comforts of this world that Egypt promised, because part of the reason why Egypt promised the good land was so that Israel's flocks could be graced there. Maybe I'm going to trust God that his promises are always true. And the Egyptians, this culture, what this world promises, is never true. All right. That should close it for today. I went a little over time today, but we have some more study Saturday and Sunday. And what I want to do different those days is I kind of did more talking today. I want us all to engage those next 2 days. So what I'm going to do before we go is tell you what I plan to do. What I'll do is break up groups. And I'll actually be like, okay, you guys take King James Bibles and a concordance. And these are the scripture verses I want you guys to quickly look at. You guys will take the Rashi's commentary. And here's the scripture verses I want you guys to look at. And you guys are going to take maybe the Chumash. And we're all going to be able to be like, hey, here's some things that stood out to me, and bounce ideas off of each other. That's what I want to do. Today was more introductory, just showing you what I do, what the process is, what I go through when I study. But hopefully that helped you guys. Thank you.